This one's short because we spent most of the time doing test review, and you didn't get to see it because you're not in the classroom.
Or on
Ha
the
ha. That's a little mean, but come to class. So, the keyword for creating an exception in Java is throw. In other languages, we have different words for this. In Python, for example, the word is raise. You raise an exception. But in Java, we throw an exception so that later something else might try to catch it. Exceptions are objects. Exceptions are objects, just like everything else in Java is an object, because Java is an object-oriented language. Even primitives are objects if you squint at them. When we create an exception in the same way that we create any other object. We state the type of the class we wish to instantiate. In this case, it's an input mismatch exception. We give it a name, E. E is typical because, like, why would you pick a fancy name for this? It only exists between two lines of code, you know? And we all know what an exception is. New input mismatch exception. Here, you can provide an optional error message with the exception class. So if you want the error to say something particular, you can put it right there. Question?
Is error a reserved word in Java?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
But we can look it up. Nope.
No, it's not.
There you go.
Okay.
So this is the list of all reserved words in Java.
Go to. Not in use.
Not in use
Aww.
and has no function. But you're still not allowed to use it. It's still reserved. It's reserved for people who
I can't implement my own go-to method.
actually go to. Java does have go-tos.
Sure, everything does.
Yeah, the most common usage of go-tos in Java is to use them as a multi-loop break. But you should never ever use go-tos for any reason. Ever. So, here we are declaring the separate variable, instantiating it, then throwing the error. This is useful if you want to attach some additional information to the exception that might not originate elsewhere. But if all you need is just an exception, you can also instantiate a new exception object on the same line that you're throwing it. That way it kind of comes out as an anonymous, unnamed exception, but it still works. A throw statement is a bit like a return statement. It's like a spicy return. Execution halts immediately and control returns to the calling method. The calling method is then responsible for catching the thrown exception in the manner that we've seen previously. So, given this awesome power, you must now control your awesome power. So, here are some guidelines for the types of exceptions that you may wish to throw and when. You can create and throw an exception of any type at any time, or you can even create your own exception types. But the one that you will probably use the most is illegal argument exception. Illegal argument exception. So, when if you remember way back to the Arkanoid assignment that we did right at the beginning of the class, you had a bunch of guards, like you must enter an X value, that it should be between this and that, right? Technically, if somebody gives you a value outside of the allowed range, it is an illegal argument. And if we were not handling those gracefully, using if statements, we would be throwing illegal argument exceptions.
This is way faster.
Make sense? Because you can provide just a general string here. A thing that is very often useful to do is to provide the value that was illegal. Right? It's like, throw new illegal argument exception. X is expected to be less than 0. X was 7. That is a useful error message. It provides enough information that you might even be able to debug it by gum. But just your generic illegal argument exception is still reasonably informative because it's going to tell you what line number this occurred in. So you will be able to pinpoint, if not the exact value of X that made everything go awry, certainly the place where things failed, right? But actually knowing the actual value that was illegal, that is useful. So that's what that's for. It's always good, yeah, exactly. X must be positive, and if you want it to be even fancier, tell me what X was. More information is better than less.
X plus.
Right? If this exception is caught, you can access the message it created using the getMessage method of the exception class. So, any questions about exceptions?
Can you scroll up a bit to the last page?
Yep.
So your second one that's throwing the anonymous illegal argument exception. How
Yes.
do you access the get message method there?
Inside of the catch phrase of the catching method. So if we remember how catches look, we have a try
Yep.
in which the exception occurs. We have one or multiple catch clauses. Each one
it's gonna
takes
count
as
the-
input the thrown exception. This must match the particular exception type that you are generating. If you want to match all of them,
Use the generic one.
you just use exception, which is the superclass for all exception types.
Right. Okay.
So if you have exception E, you then say
E
E dot get message, and that's how you access that information again. Make sense?
Because it's always passing that, even if it's anonymous, it's always passing that E to the catch block.
Precisely. It doesn't have to be named where it's being thrown.
Yes.
This will name it where it's being caught. So, lists! I already discussed the memory differences between arrays and lists in this class, so I will not repeat myself. But let's just summarize our results from a previous lesson. What is the primary difference between lists and arrays?
An array is a chunk of memory that is all connected to each other, and a list is just a point and then a pointer to another piece of memory that has data.
Yes.
Arrays are a fixed length, array lists can be resized.
Yes. So lists are better for data which is changed rapidly throughout the course of the execution of a program. Basically, if the number of elements you need is static, if it doesn't change, an array is going to be more efficient. But if you're performing a lot of these sort of dynamic operations, a lot of insertions and deletions, lists end up being more efficient than arrays. So, rough summary. So, what in the name of all of the cheese in Buckingham Palace is an array list? Because it seems to be both things at once.
The wrapper class for an array.
So, arrays are a generic class. Essentially, what an array list is it's a class which implements the interface of a list, while in the actual memory system, it's implementing it as an array. So it still has the runtime characteristics of an array, but it has all of the operations of a list, like push, pop, insert, delete, all of those things. Question?
And you can use random access for an array. You don't array list. You don't have to go from start. Like
Yes.
serial access.
Yes, exactly. So in a list, if you want to access any particular element in a list, you must trace the list, you must walk the data structure to find it. In an array, because everything is a contiguous chunk of memory, the word you were looking for is contiguous, by the way. Because it was a contiguous chunk of memory, you get to any position of it in it simply by performing mathematics. You have to take the index you want to access, offset it by the memory offset of the data structure, and multiply it by the data width of the elements of the array, and that's a constant time operation. Question?
No.
No, behind you.
So since array lists are an implementation of array, so does the length change in the memory?
So, yes and no. It changes it in memory because it's now an object and not a primitive, but that object contains an array. So, the place that the data is actually stored doesn't change. What changes is we're now wrapping it in a class, we're wrapping it in a bunch of a bunch of methods which are designed to improve our access to it and reduce our need to basically perform a bunch of array operations, basic array operations ourselves. So, but let's talk about generics. All right? So, generics in Java, they're actually a fairly important topic in Java, which is only covered in a very minor way, only in this particular section. A generic is a type variable. In Java, where you see angle braces, you can think of that as an argument list. The argument that is being provided is a type, not a variable.
So that array list wants to hold strings and only strings.
Precisely. So looking at this example here, we have an array list of strings, right? String is the generic type. It's the type provided to the generic, pardon me. So the reason for doing this is it allows us to define a class to operate over multiple other types of classes. So a definition for array list, without this, we would have to have a class for array list of ints, array list of doubles, array list of strings, array lists of bools. Yes?
That has to use a primitive. So if I want to use integers, it has to be array list, capital I integer, or is it array list int?
I'm pretty sure that you can provide primitives here.
Okay.
I'd have to double check,